Hello, everybody. Welcome to Shadow at Night. This is Thursday, May the 15th, 2025. On the show tonight, attorney Jeff Rath with the, Prosperity, what? Alberta Prosperity Project. We're going to talk about Alberta sovereignty on the show tonight. And Jeff is, as far as I'm concerned anyway, the leading authority on First Nations in this country. He's pretty much dedicated his life's work to helping First Nations communities versus governments in many situations for the last 30 years. And so one of the big questions we have for Jeff tonight is why all of this opposition, why all of this rhetoric coming from the First Nations regarding Alberta separating from Canada, considering the fact that they'll probably be better off. So that's definitely one of the topics that we're going to discuss tonight. Also, Jan Arden, you know that name? Jan Arden, singer. She's from Alberta, right? So she released a video on her TikTok. I'm not sure if it was last night or today, but guaranteed to make your blood boil. Completely and totally ignorant of everything. She is speaking straight from her ass. And we're going to play that video in just a few moments. Shadow at Night live stream is always brought to you by CanadaNanoSilver.com.
For the future of natural wellness with Canada Nano Silver. Trusted by families across Canada, our Nano Silver solutions are designed to support your immune system every single day. Whether you're protecting your kids, boosting your own immunity, or caring for aging parents, Nano Silver helps keep your whole household healthier. Our advanced formula harnesses the natural power of silver at the microscopic level, fighting bacteria, supporting healing, and enhancing your body's defenses. From immune gummies to soothing gel and powerful liquid drops, we offer a complete lineup for your family's well-being. It's not just protection. It's peace of mind, powered by science. Choose Canada Nano Silver, because your family deserves the best in natural immune support.
CanadaNanoSilver.com. The website again is CanadaNanoSilver.com. If you have any questions about the products, am I going to turn blue? You can get a hold of Kevin and Anna through the contact tab on the website. It's in the upper right-hand corner on the home page, CanadaNanoSilver.com. Before we get to Jeff and the Alberta sovereignty discussion tonight, we do have an update that came from Katie, of course, Katie Pasitny at Universal Ostrich Farm in British Columbia. Very good day today. It's a small win, but it's a win. And this weekend at the farm, in case you happen to be in that area and you want to pop in and say hello, I know there's a lot of people heading down there. Ostrich Fest this weekend. Here's Katie.
Hi, everybody. It's Katie from, not in Edgewood right now. I'm in Nelson at the RDCK office. I have some really good news. We showed up today. Farrell said, get in the car. He's like, you gotta go. And I was shaking. I grabbed a bag. I jumped in the car. We got here in very good timing. We got here just before the meeting ended for the board of directors of the RDCK discussing the dump and the acceptance of our carcasses. They called us back at 1:30. They gave me a question and time to speak. And they just announced that they will be requiring that those carcasses can't come to any of the RDCK landfills without the further testing of the healthy animals that are on our farm May 15th and after. And to do so, that they need to be retested before they accept them. And that those results are going to have to be public knowledge. I want to thank you. I want to thank you all so much for your continued support and to be on the farm. Oh my God. All of the love. This is a win. This is a big win for us because the landfill is acknowledging that they will not accept our healthy, big, beautiful birds. So I'm going to see you back at the farm here really soon. I love you all with all my heart. I love you, Mama. We're going to save those guys. And we're going to help all the other farmers out there. We're going to let you guys know that you're not alone and we're going to save you too. And we're going to fix these practices that deserve to be fixed to help add sustainability back to our food supply, protection to the farmers who are heroes working tirelessly to try to change the world, to give us nutritional food supply, to give us nutritional food supply, to work like we have tirelessly to come up with options. And give us options and research and stuff like we have here at Universal Ostrich Farms to help stabilize viruses and disease in the future without the need for all of the other big pharma stuff. So I just love you all. It was a really big win right now. There's other methods. I don't want to, we still have the call order open. We're working hard at that, but let's just keep bringing everybody to the farm. Let's make the change. Let's do it. The people's voices matter. People's opinion matters. And we can do this all across the world. I just want to really please instill something else, and I don't want to take away from the win because I just finally, just felt so good to have something with such great people happen. But this is a small win and a big fight. And the truth of the matter, the fact is that Canadian Food Inspection Agency, the call order is still on. So we set a precedence today, and let's hope. I'm gonna call on you, Vernon. I'm gonna call on you, Kelowna, and all the surrounding areas to step up and make the same stand, set the same precedence, and let's protect these animals and other farmers around the world. We have the ability to do so. We have a lot of strength in numbers. Public opinion matters. I keep saying that. I appreciate all of you, but just remember, small win and a big fight, but that small win, it was because of all these board members listened to their heart and their intuition, and they knew that this was wrong. So, being threatened 6 months in jail, $250,000 fine, based on that we can't retest to show that these animals pose no public health and safety risk. Come on, right? So just keep fighting, keep coming. Please, people, come to the farm. We're having Ostrich Fest 2025. I found out this weekend. So there's such a great new number of people. We're going to do some face painting and a lot of love and a lot of laughs. Let's bring the energy to the ostriches.
So there you go. Small win, like Katie says, in a big fight. Here's Jeff Rath. He is with the Alberta Prosperity Project. Hey, buddy, how you doing?
I'm doing great. How are you?
Good. Thanks for coming on again tonight. I'm not sure. Do you have any thoughts on this whole ostrich thing, or no?
I haven't really been following it, but it sounds like the same level of fuckery that we expect from those types of people. Like jailing egg farmers. All the rest of it. We've got some of that shit going on in Alberta too. I'll watch my language. Sorry, long day, but it's. But anyway, yeah, no, it's all the same ludicrous garbage that we were dealing with in COVID. Too many bureaucrats, too little time.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the big thing is that CFIA, Food Inspection Agency, told the farm that they can't have their animals independently tested for H5N1, the bird flu. It would be a $250,000 fine and possible time in jail. So the only evidence to present in this court case is theirs and nobody else's, even though there are several reputable scientists who have done testing on these animals and confirmed that they don't have these this disease any longer. You're right. There's a great level of fuckery in all of this.
It's despicable. I mean, it's all the COVID litigation I did. They got in Alberta, they got a Nobel laureate by the name of Sir Michael Houghton to prostitute his Nobel laureate by swearing an affidavit in one of my cases where they're trying to fire doctors that wouldn't get vaccinated, and he swore an affidavit that said the pandemic would never end until every single person in the world was vaccinated. So that in effect, because my doctors were holding out from being vaccinated, they were keeping the pandemic from ending worldwide. It was the most atrocious, ridiculous piece of garbage affidavit that's ever been filed. But because this Nobel laureate was the head of this thing called the Li Ka-shing Institute of Virology in Edmonton, I call it the Li Ka-ching Institute because they're just prostituting themselves for buckets and buckets of government money, right?
Yeah.
That they actually thought it was appropriate to file an affidavit that was disgustingly false and patently misleading in the context of a case that we were doing. So I see that nonsense all the time.
So how is it that they can file a completely and totally false affidavit? That's what an affidavit is supposed to be, the truth, is it not?
Well, no, that's my point entirely. And the law, and quite frankly, I think the lawyers that put that affidavit together should have been sanctioned. Right? Like it's just, it's just ridiculous that you tender that, and I was cross-examining the guy. It was pretty funny. And I said, and at least he had a good sense that, he was in good humor about the fact that he was being, that he was prostituting his intellect and his reputation on that affidavit. And I said, Sir Michael, I said, when you say that everybody in the world has to be vaccinated before the COVID pandemic will end, I said, aren't you just like a beauty contest contestant praying for world peace, right? I said, how are we going to get everybody in war-torn Somalia or Eritrea or wherever, get all of them vaccinated? So instead of answering that question, I have lots of relatives in South Africa and they're very pro-vaccine. Well, that's not science. I mean, it's just ludicrous bullshit. But it comes with the imprimatur of a Nobel laureate attached to his name. Did
you have to call him sir?
Oh, I can't remember what I called him. I probably called him a lot of other names in private. But
okay, I think you're in a good mood. So I'm.
Hey, two things, big deal. Mm-hmm. So the Oilers beat Las Vegas last night. That was huge, right? Yep. So I was very happy about that. But more importantly and more directly in line with the conversation that we're going to have tonight, the Alberta legislature passed Bill 54 through third reading last night. So that is now law in Alberta. Well, it's not quite law yet. It has to be proclaimed yet. But the minute it's proclaimed, we'll be launching our petition. And with it, that lowers the number of signatures we need for our referendum question to 177,000 signatures. And as of today, we are now over 250,000 pledges for referendum signatures, petition signatures, which will literally, I think, enable us to get all the requisite number of verified signatures within 30 to 60 days of launching our petition drive. So
that's interesting because that bill was only introduced a couple of weeks ago. That was fast, man.
Oh yeah, no, it's conservative majority in Alberta, and I have to say, I mean, I've been saying some not quite complimentary things about Danielle, lately because there is some shenanigans going on in the background that we're not very happy about. But with that one, 100% credit to her. Promise made, because she promised to do that when she was running for the leadership of the UCP. I was at an APP leadership debate that we hosted, where she made that promise. And all the credit to Danielle Smith. She kept her promise. She got the bill through, and now we're ready to have a referendum this year in Alberta, and we're excited about it.
Okay, let me play this for you. And I'm not sure what your reaction is going to be, but I'm looking forward to it. It's 60 seconds of Jan Arden.
Hey, Alberta. Hey, you bunch of fucking separatist wackos. How you doing? Feeling good about yourselves? You're an embarrassment to this country. Everything you have, everything that you have enjoyed, cherished, and benefited from comes from being part of one of the greatest countries on the planet. You guys have your heads so far up your asses that you obviously can't see what pricks you are. The way you are treating Indigenous people, the way you are treating your fellow citizens, your fellow Canadians, you guys are a bunch of creepy little pricks. Alberta will never separate from Canada. It's never going to happen because people like me are going to stand up, throw their shoulders back, and keep fucking yelling and keep standing up for what I know is right. And what you guys are doing is...
Look, you know, I mean, what can I say? I mean, I really, really love Jan Arden. I think she's, you know, a phenomenal talent. She has a great voice. She's a great singer. If you ever go to one of her shows, she's a great comedian, right? But I think somebody needs to adjust her meds, right? Yeah. So, you know, I mean, she's obviously, I mean, completely unhinged. I actually found that, you know, I'm not going to say anything mean about her. I mean, she's obviously got mental health problems, so I'm not going to go there. But, you know, for her to suggest just carte blanche that, you know, that all of us are involved in, you know, somehow doing something to harm the Indigenous people of Alberta is one of the most disgusting and despicable things that anybody could ever accuse me of or accuse us of. Like, you know, one of the reasons that I actually founded APP was because I was a little bit, I was very, not a little bit, I was very uncomfortable with some of the rhetoric coming out of some of the old line, you know, independence parties in Alberta, right? You know, this idea that, you know, you got these guys like, yeah, fuck it, like we're going to be separate. We're not going to have to respect the treaties anymore. And we're not going to blah, blah, blah. And everybody's going to be equal. And, you know, all of that stuff obviously made me extremely uncomfortable, made me very unhappy. This time, I dismissed most people involved in and around the independence movement in Alberta, you know, frankly, as a bunch of cranks, right? For that reason, because it's, you know, and again, in fairness to those people, obviously not well educated on the issue, don't understand what is really going on, and and the degree to which Indigenous people in Canada have suffered and have been kept in abject poverty by, you know, a despicable colonial regime in Ottawa that Alberta wants to free itself from. Right. I've been suing the government of Canada my entire career as a lawyer, you know, winning precedent, you know, setting cases at the Supreme Court of Canada on behalf of Indigenous people. In fact, one of the cases that I won, the Mikisew Cree decision at the Supreme Court, legal scholars have referred to as the greatest treaty and Aboriginal rights victory in Canada since the case of St. Catherine's Millings in the 19th century. Right. So there's no way that I would ever involve myself in anything that would in any way disrespect the treaties or Aboriginal rights of Alberta's Indigenous people or Indigenous people anywhere in this country. I have devoted my life to lifting those people, you know, to helping to lift those people out of poverty. You know, and that's the poverty that's been imposed upon them by Ottawa's so-called jurisdiction over Indians and Indian lands, you know, to quote the Constitution Act, right? So, you know, for Jan Arden to gratuitously suggest that, you know, that I'm associated with or any of the people that I'm involved with are a bunch of racists that hate Indigenous people is one of the lowest, most despicable things that I can imagine. But again, I just chalk it up to the fact that she's got obvious mental health issues and probably needs to readjust her meds, right? Like,
I would suggest that she's speaking emotionally and not off any sort of knowledge of the situation. Let's go into this a little bit because we have seen some First Nations chiefs piping off the last week or so, and you and I talked about this on the phone, and suggesting that Danielle Smith should get out of the province, get off their land. What is ceded versus unceded lands? How many treaties are there? Like, what are with all these?
But again, that's not that's not the issue, right? So
Well,
the issue,
not with the
just leave that alone for 1 second, Chad. Like, I want to address this, the Chiefs coming out and, making the statements they made. Well, if you look, there was a very chubby, prominent brown face in and at that press conference, that of Naheed Nenshi, who was there, for the NDP, stirring up the pot and making all of these outrageous statements with no legal foundation, specifically that anything that Alberta is going to do by way of reorganizing the manner in which it's governed, right, is going to somehow impact on the treaty and Aboriginal rights of the Indigenous nations of Alberta. What I asked the Chiefs, and it's kind of like, I'm kind of puzzled by the fact that they're being so misled by by the NDP and Nenshi and left-wing lawyers and consultants that are around them. Like, why do they want to keep sending $15 billion a year to Quebec as opposed to having that money remain in an independent Alberta where we can have a constitutionalized resource revenue sharing agreement with them that would see their annual revenues triple or quadruple, to help lift their communities out of poverty? Why do they want $15 billion a year to go to Quebec so Quebec can run these gold-plated apprenticeship programs, which I understand include paying a salary to people that are going to trade school, paying a salary to people, while they're apprenticing to supplement any income that they get from, their employers where they're apprenticing. Basically all of this money being spent to encourage Quebecers to obtain post-secondary education in the trades, right? Why the hell do the Chiefs want that money going to Quebec as opposed to having that money in Alberta so that we can run, that they could run the same types of programs for themselves, in Alberta with money that would be derived from a constitutionalized resource revenue sharing agreement? I personally wouldn't be involved in this if I did not in my heart of hearts believe that whatever deal was going to be reached following, and keep in mind, the Clarity Act requires ongoing consultations and negotiations with First Nations. International law requires it. The people in and around myself, keep in mind, I have an honors degree in political science. I have an honors degree in law from the London School of Economics. Dennis Modry, who I work with, has medical degrees from the University of Alberta and Stanford, and and founded the Thoracic Heart and Lung Transport Plant program at the University of Alberta Hospital. We have CEOs of financial institutions, you name it, working with us. None of us are ill-educated people that disrespect the rights of Indigenous people. And in fact, Alberta Prosperity Project's Indigenous policy was developed in consultation with Indigenous leaders in Alberta, and every one of them that's actually looked at it, considered it, thought about it, has said, wow, if this is what we get in an independent Alberta, we're going to be so much better off than living our hand-to-mouth existence under Canada. I mean, I know you're in Manitoba, so go up to northern Manitoba, up on, Lake Winnipeg, and visit some of the communities on the shore of Lake Winnipeg up north. The level of poverty in those communities is heartbreaking, and Canada allows that to exist. You still have communities in Manitoba that don't have safe drinking water, that are still under boiled water advisories. We have them in Alberta as well. I mean, I've been to these communities. I've lived in these communities. I've worked in these communities. I've been home to home in these communities. And I'll tell you, at the end of a long day of going home, house to house to explain a settlement agreement to people, or to tell the community what's going on in the context of the work we're doing. Some days I would go back to my hotel room and almost want to break down in tears at the level of poverty and destitution that Canada has put those communities in and has kept them in for decades, for well over 100 years, by disrespecting their treaty rights. Like, perfect example, Treaty 6, Treaty 8. There's a clear treaty right to post-secondary education, not a government program. It doesn't say, and we'll provide a government program, for post-secondary education in the event that we can find the money and we don't have too many applicants. Under Treaty 6 and Treaty 8, there is a clear, unequivocal treaty right to post-secondary education. I believe the language of the Commissioner's report is Treaty 8. Your children shall be educated, ever increasing in knowledge, so as to enable them to always earn a living. I mean, if that's not post-secondary education, I don't know what the hell is, right? So but instead what happens is Indigenous people go into, whatever the hell they call Indian Affairs now and say, hey, I'm accepted. I want to go to university this fall, or I want to go to SAID or NAID or, welding school or whatever. And here's my acceptance. I need the money. And they go, oh, gee, we're sorry. You're here too late. There's not enough, in the program budget. Better luck next year. I mean, since when does something you're entitled to as of right, get doled out, as a program dollar? Right? And think about all the liability that should accrue to Canada, for all of the generations of Indigenous people that they've denied post-secondary education, right? It's despicable what they do. And I'm telling you this. I mean, I've been fighting with Canada my entire career, litigating with Canada my entire career. Their typical, modus of operandi is to delay, until, people are grateful when they finally come to the negotiating table and offer pennies on the dollar and, in exchange for a complete settlement. And then some of the more abusive settlements in Alberta, a full indemnity in favor of Canada in the event that any future members come along and want to sue Canada for the same thing. The First Nations that signed the agreement are then expected to pay Canada's legal costs if anybody else comes along to sue them because they didn't participate in the settlement or whatever, right? Canada is despicable in its treatment of Indigenous people. And I tell Indigenous people in Alberta, I said, just remember, Canada hates you way more than they hate us. They hate Indigenous people way more than they hate oil and gas guys, and they hate Indigenous people way more than they hate farmers. You just have to look at the way they're treated. So, this whole notion that somehow or other that, by Alberta, removing itself from this abusive relationship with Canada and literally having, keeping $70 billion a year in tax money that's otherwise going to the feds to be doled out between, Quebec, Ontario, the Maritimes, whatever, get filtered through that massive federal grotesque bureaucracy that Trudeau created, to get dribs and drabs of it back. Canada takes $70 billion a year from Alberta. They give us $30 billion back. So where's that $40 billion going? I guess part of it's going to go to pay for Justin Trudeau's corrupt choo-choo train, between Toronto and Montreal, where he got his buddies, from SNC Lavalin. Remember SNC Lavalin, the company that was hiring hookers to close business contracts? Well, they're now, they're now going to be running Justin's choo-choo train project. My only question is, where's Canada going to get the money to finish it when Alberta leaves and they don't have our money anymore?
They're never going to finish that, even if Alberta stays. So you're obviously personally acquainted with many of the chiefs throughout Alberta. And I have to come back to the question from the beginning, which is, if they know that Canada treats them so badly and they're hated more than the oil and gas guys or even the farmers or whatever, then why do they stand with Canada when it comes to all this?
They're not really standing with Canada. They're standing with Naheed Nenshi, our the chief, the chief dipper in Alberta. And, and I guess to the extent that they're saying, that, oh, we don't want Alberta to leave Canada or whatever, they've been convinced, by left-wing lawyers in and around them that somehow or other that this is going to be bad for them, or that this is somehow, going to result in the termination or extinguishment of their treaty rights. Under both domestic and international law, that's a complete impossibility. So they're being fed a load of bullshit. And, we have lawyers too that say, oh, this is going to disrupt any claims that you have outstanding and you're not going to be able to sue Canada anymore and all this kind of stuff. All of Canada's liability to First Nations remains Canada's liability to First Nations, whether Alberta remains in Canada or not. Right. Yeah. And then on top of it, First Nations are certainly not going to be told that they have to, if they want to continue to have their Indigenous reserve lands administered by a bunch of incompetent bureaucrats in Ottawa and Edmonton and wherever else, and be told, how, when, where, and why they can do anything on their own land, and have to, go through all the hoops and hurdles to develop their own lands and all the rest of it, with the involvement of federal bureaucrats, most of whom don't know their ass from a hole in the ground. Right. Then, they're free to do that. They can be little federal enclaves all over Alberta and not have a resource revenue sharing agreement. And they can continue to sue Ottawa for, to their heart's content, whatever. But the laws that exist continues to apply. I've obviously been a big part of all of the multi-billion-dollar wealth that's been generated, to First Nations as a result of all of the consultation cases that I pioneered and won. I mean, I think I was one of the first lawyer in Canada to pioneer the use of judicial review applications to advance First Nations consultation rights, which have basically ensured that First Nations across the country are now respected by industry or partnering with industry, have all the economic growth and wealth that they have. That's all as a result of all of the early cases that I was arguing. I mean, shit, at one point we were shutting down a big 3D seismic pipeline. This is a funny story. I got to tell you this one. So in northeastern BC, it was called Remington Inga 3D. And we had a really, really hardworking, industrious Duneza trapper who had a very successful trap line on this traditional territory, and they want to overlay a 3D seismic program over it. So anyway, I said, look, you guys, my client's really upset because if, in 3D seismic, it's really intensive. The lines are really close together, whatever, right? And I said, you're going to disrupt all of his trapping on his trap line for at least 3 years. You're going to scare all the animals away. He's not going to have income for 3 years. So, he doesn't want to bend you guys over a barrel. He just wants a job. Like, he can run a power saw. He can do whatever. Just put him on payroll for 3 years until, his trap line, restores itself, and we're all good. And they're, basically, F you. We don't hire Indians. They, first paycheck, they get, oh no, this was like 30 years ago, right? Right. First paycheck, they get drunk and disappear and blah, blah, blah. Why would we do that? Blah, blah, blah. And of course, keep in mind, I love this guy. He was salt of the earth, hardworking, industrious, didn't drink. Lived on the land, just a great guy, right? And, basically being told that they don't want to hire him because all Indians are drunks and, whatever. So I said, look, if you're not going to be reasonable, I said, you're not going to leave us an alternative, but we're going to have to go to court and get an injunction and shut you down. Oh, well, we'd like to see you try. So anyway, we went to court, we got an injunction, we shut them down, and it so shattered the stock price of this company that they were later gobbled up by a larger competitor and ceased to exist as a country or as a company. Because they wouldn't respect treaty and Aboriginal rights. And I got to tell you another funny story in and around that too. At the same time, and this is how wild the Wild West was 30 years ago, right? These guys had 6 oil field scouts on me. So anybody that's been in and around the oil field knows what an oil field scout is. They're basically, dirty thugs, private investigators that are hired by oil companies to make mischief on behalf of the companies when people are stirring up trouble for them, right? So they had these oil field scouts parked outside my ranch on the highway, looking into my living room one day with binoculars. So this is a long time ago. I wasn't married yet, and because I was a bachelor, I still had my rifle cabinet in my living room, as one would. And I had a buddy that had come up to hunt with me that fall, and he was ex-military, ex-American Army captain. One of my best friends. And I said, Mr. Gernstein, I said, apparently somebody's looking into my living room with a pair of binoculars. Would you please go to the rifle cabinet, remove my .338 Winchester Magnum from the cabinet, strip the bolt out of the weapon, rendering it inoperative as a firearm? Right away, Mr. Rath. Hands me my .338. I take a wrap on the sling, and I slowly lower a 9-power scope on the face of the guy that's got his binoculars looking into my living room, right? You've never seen a pair of binoculars go down so fast that a car moves so quickly. So I turned back to my army buddy, and I said, well, how about that, Mr. Gernstein? Sometimes when you look into a man's living room, you might just see something you don't want to see.
Wow. What are those guys still around? Like, what are they called? Oil Rangers? Like, what?
No. They're called oil field scouts. Or at least they were scouts. Yeah. Years ago, there's a big article about them in the Alberta Report. But yeah, they specialized in union busting and mischief making and threatening people that tried to organize. And they're kind of like the Pinkertons. Yeah. It was that kind of thing, right?
Holy crap, man! That's
to this day, I still have no idea what they thought they were going to see in my living room. But it was it's just a form of intimidation, right? I mean, it's just like all the death threats that I've been getting at my office over all the Alberta independence stuff we're working on, right? People think that I'm easily intimidated. I'm not very. So it's kind of a waste of time.
Have you tracked down any of those death threats? Or are they all coming in?
No, they're all, and some of them were stupid enough to send them from their own personal emails. So anyway, we gave a stack about that thick to the RCMP, and I guess they're currently being, kind of ironically, the Royal Canadian Mountain Police. But anyway, soon to be the Alberta Provincial Police Force. But anyway, it's being dealt with. I mean, it's pretty disgusting and despicable. I mean, the left wing's losing their minds because a lot of them, and that's Jan Arden too. I mean, let's, remember that she made her career, and got well fed, like a tick on a moose, taking money out of the CBC, the Canadian content rules, the whole Juno, that whole Juno system, Canadian grant system, whatever. So yeah, I'm sure she doesn't like the idea of Alberta leaving Canada. I mean, she's basically been on the federal payroll her entire music career. So, good for her. I mean, she owes, she's showing some loyalty to the people that bought her various houses for her and, keep her in royalty checks, but I mean, there's no reason for her to indulge in that kind of name calling and language and whatever. I mean, we love Jan Arden.
Maybe being paid or something. I mean,
who knows? I mean, we love Jan Arden. We just don't understand why she's being so rude and mean to us. But anyway, who knows? Maybe she'll get over it. I don't know.
So I had Keith Wilson on last week, our buddy Keith, and he was telling me there are 13 distinct sovereignist groups in Alberta, and a couple of them merged, I think, maybe last week. But I said, is there any chance of all of these groups getting together under one flag so that we get one petition? Because I know that you wrote or a possible petition question with Keith, I think, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
But is it possible these other groups decide, well, we're going to write a petition question too? And
they're not going to need to. And quite frankly, like amongst the independence movement, right? They all understand that the Alberta Prosperity Project is leading the charge on the referendum, right? We're the ones that have been gathering all the signatures. We're the ones that have the list of 250,000 verified names and pledges to sign. We've through our website we now have, and God, it's been crazy since Carney was elected. 20,000 new volunteers that we're trying to onboard right now. Like, just imagine how chaotic our lives are, right? So,
wow.
Oh yeah, I was at an event in Ponoka earlier this week, and all these I volunteered. When's somebody gonna get back to me? It's like, dude, can you just chill? Like, we're trying to deal with it. There's 20,000 of you, but I said, here we are. We're at an APP event, so there's your chapter leader, there's your regional director. Just go talk to them directly. Glad you came. Thank you. But they're really exercised over the fact that we need to volunteer now. We need to do something now. What can we do, right? So I think it's awesome, right? It's awesome.
We were talking earlier this week about how busy you've been, and that's why you were at Ponoka the other night. You couldn't come on Tuesday night, so I'm glad you're here tonight. How busy are you going to be? And exactly, I mean, are you going to visit or try to every single community in Alberta?
I'm probably going to try to limit it, to like one APP speaking event a week, and I'll do all the bigger ones, like all the biggest ones. For sure. I mean, I love my Albertans, but I mean, at the same time, I still have to work and earn a living. And I've got a couple big COVID class action cases that were taken forward against the government of Alberta that need to be serviced. And, I'm actually considering a really interesting case right now about suing the government of Canada or various bureaucrats in the government of Canada for misfeasance in public office over all of their continued utterances about greenhouse gases being an existential threat to Canada and the world, right? Because all the scientific evidence is actually the opposite. Of course, we all know CO2 is good for plants. And the more, we're actually way below the level we should be for CO2 in our atmosphere right now. We're almost on the point of plant starvation or browning of the earth. And now that we see that the CO2 levels are slowly rising back up to where, above critical levels, that deserts in China and India are regenerating. I can show you NASA charts and pictures from Alberta that would blow you away, that literally show this huge dip in crop outputs and productivity and plant growth in Alberta that coincided with the massive COVID lockdown that got all the greenies so excited about the fact that, oh, isn't this wonderful? This is what life will look like on Earth once we get rid of all those awful people, right? Yeah. So I mean, I'm very interested in that. I've got lots of other interests, right? But this is something, that I'm giving my heart and soul to, and I'm committed, to staying, at the helm and continuing to move this thing forward with our leadership team until we succeed in getting, Alberta out of Canada, right? And if anybody knows me, or if anybody's ever looked at my legal career, it'll show you that if I'm nothing else, if not so completely stubborn, and I never
tenacious, determined.
Yeah, and I never lose because I never quit. Right. So anyway, we're going to keep going until we're done, and we're hoping that we're going to have a vote in November of this year and vote, Alberta out of Canada. I mean, we're getting some pushback on that. There's other groups that are, oh no, that's too fast, and you're going to ruin it. We only have one chance, and whatever. But there's something to be said. There's something to be said for momentum. The referendum, I'm convinced Danielle Smith is messing around with it in the background. Like, she wants to not have a single standalone question. She wants to add a bunch of other referenda questions to the ballot, including, should there be an Alberta pension plan? Do you support Alberta policing taking over the RCMP, and all these other things that kind of confuse the issue? Because ultimately, if you answer our question, right, do you agree that Alberta shall become an independent or sovereign country and cease to be a province of Canada? All of those other things have to follow that, surely as night follows day, right? Yes. So, to try to confuse the issue and confuse the people of Alberta with, all these competing referenda questions, which seems to be the strategy coming out of Danielle Smith's office.
No, wait a minute. Just a second. If you ask all of these different questions on the same ballot, same day, right? So your question, which I thought was clear, wouldn't that confuse the issue? And
that's the whole point. They're trying to confuse the issue. Because like Danielle Smith still hasn't got it through her head that she needs to be on Team Alberta and not Team Canada. So, and I've been joking about it when I did some of my public speaking engagements.
But she pushes so hard with the federal media, Jeff. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but like she does, and she's being vilified by the left-wing corporate media, from Toronto, from Ottawa, and also obviously from Alberta, right? So she goes far enough to get that vilification, but not far enough to have anybody who truly believes in Alberta.
No, she's literally making the same mistake that led to Jason Kenney being turfed out of office, right? So with Kenney issuing all those phony CMOH orders that we had overturned in Alberta, that I succeeded in having overturned in Alberta, what Kenney was trying to do was he was picking the option that was always sort of in the middle. So he didn't want to pick an option that was presented to him that would see no restrictions, right? And he didn't want to go, with the, let's say the maximum, lockdown, options that were also presented to him. He was picking the option in the middle that was most likely to equally piss off everybody on both sides of the issue. It's a very rare political trick to be able to pull that off, but Jason Kenney did, and it resulted in him being turfed out of office on his ass, right? And what my concern is, because I like Danielle Smith, I think she's been an effective leader. She's very personable. I like her on a personal level, et cetera, et cetera. But I think the people that are advising her, who incidentally are the same bozos that were advising Jason Kenney, right? With, the exception of one or two, but like 12 of her cabinet ministers are former Kenney cabinet ministers, right? So the bozos that were in and around Jason Kenney are basically telling her to do the same thing. It's like, okay, well, you promised that you're going to have this reduction of the Citizens Initiative Act number, right? So, which she did. So promise made, promise kept. Well, at least that showed some integrity. But then everybody else is now saying, okay, but you can't support this, and you've got to hold the line on Team Canada, and that's why we have this ridiculous. I was laughing about it the other day. Like, you're old enough to remember that TV show, The Courtship of Eddie's Father. So I now call this the courtship of Danielle Smith, where Mark Carney's expected to come to Alberta with a box of chocolates, in the form of pipeline corridors and, things that we need, an end to the no pipeline bill, an end to emission caps, and end all the things on Danielle's list. That's the box of chocolates she wants. But we heard Carney the other day, and he said, well, maybe one pipeline, a pipeline, but only after, I develop a national consensus around the issue. And we've already heard that Quebec has said national consensus. We'll no sooner sign on to a new pipeline, then we'll agree to signing the 82 Constitution. And then we heard the gibbering Gibault popped up out of his little gopher hole the day after Carney made his pipeline announcement that, media were all excited about, thinking he actually said that Alberta could have a pipeline. And then Gibault, we don't need any more Alberta pipelines. The TMS is only 44% full and blah, 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 blah,
Which interestingly was a lie, because it is.
No, it was a lie. Well, Gibault is a liar. Like, how do you tell a liberal's lying? Their lips are moving, right? It's pretty simple, right?
It's 80% that pipeline is at capacity-wise, and the CBC didn't bother fact-checking any of that stuff before they ran that clip. So
no, and apparently, if you talk to people that know pipeline management, you can't get a pipeline much more full than that, because then, from a management perspective, scheduling out, scheduling in, all kinds of other problems, creates all kinds of other problems. So it's basically running at capacity, because you don't want it. You don't want it at 100%, because it's not going to operate then, right?
Well, you've got different types of oil you're pumping through there, and
if I recall, they're also moving condensate, because they're moving heavy oil. So they've got oil going one way, condensate going the other, whatever. It's a complicated process. So they generally don't run those pipelines at more than 80%. So, what we're saying is get Alberta out of Canada, right? We have a strong economic message, and I want to share this message with your viewers, for those people that are thinking of starting an MPP, a Manitoba Prosperity Project, right?
Well, you know what? We've got viewers all over the country and all over the world, man. So I just want to speak to your home base, right? So what we are saying that Alberta is going to get from independence, right, is a complete cessation of all federal regulation. Done. No more federal laws, no more federal regulations, no more, like Liberal waking up in the middle of the night and coming up with a new list of rifles that should be outlawed. Carney the other day was talking about, all long range, super accurate rifles, need to be banned. Well, that's basically every freaking hunting rifle that's made, right? So what, he wants us all to go back to hunting with black powder smoothbore muskets, because it'll scare his masters in China less. Right. Yeah. So, so there's that, right? So no more federal regulations, right? No more, obviously, greenhouse gas regulations, no more carbon tax. So, Danielle, I did such a good job. I negotiated the carbon tax down to $100 a ton. Well, so a lot of the Alberta oil patch that has to flare gas is barely profitable at $100 a ton as it is. So all of those companies are going to be freed of that burden and are free to produce as much oil and gas as they can. As you probably know, we've already had a preliminary meeting with at a very senior level with the Trump administration, right? So, at least another 4 or 5 pipelines south through Montana are on the table. Complete free trade on the basis of zero tariffs on both sides of the Alberta-U.S. border on all goods and services, is on the table. Et cetera, et cetera. So, we see nothing but upside. And then on top of it, let me remind everybody, you get rid of the federal government. What are you really getting rid of? All federal taxation. No income tax, no carbon tax, no GST, no federal corporate tax, no federal luxury tax, no excise tax on fuel, no capital gains tax. On and on and on. And don't forget that these liberals, and you got Lametti, the guy that wanted to run over protesters with leopard tanks, right? A true communist, right? Yeah. Has said that Canadians have no right to property, and he's one of the proponents of the home equity tax. So that every year, as your property value goes up, you have to get your house appraised so that they can tax you on the increased value of your home equity. There won't be any of that bullshit going on in Alberta when we're no longer part of the subject to the liberal tyranny, the liberal Marxist communist tyranny from Ottawa that they want to impose on people. Let's face it. Most Canadians, like, planning for retirement, where's their largest store of value? It's in their homes. They've done the right thing. They paid off their mortgage, on and on and on. That's what they're planning on retiring on. But the Liberals want to tax it. So, get Alberta out of, and that's why we say, too, why Canada and the Liberals are an existential threat to Albertans. They want to kill us. They want to literally tax us into oblivion. So none of that's going to happen anymore in a free and independent Alberta. We could have a flat 10% income tax. We could have a flat 10% corporate tax.
maybe 1 or 2 consumption taxes, who knows, right? But whatever it takes to, to balance the budget and cover off, whatever all the requirements are. I mean, Alberta's going to have an army. It's going to have an air force. We obviously don't need a Navy and Coast Guard. We're going to use, we're going to need border patrol, right? And so on. There's certain things that we're going to have. We're going to have a very strong immigration system, because there is going to have to be, some mind paid to the huge influx of people from all over North America that are going to want to come to Alberta, because we're going to be literally an economic Shangri-La, right?
Yeah.
So, so we're going to have to deal with that from a sustainability perspective. Like, let's not forget that Trudeau has so flooded Calgary and Edmonton with immigrants and refugees under the Liberal 2.5 million immigrant a year program that, winter before last, because we had a mild winter this winter, we were literally on the verge of having the entire Alberta power grid crash because, obviously the infrastructure hadn't kept up with the level by which Trudeau was throwing people at us, right? Obviously people that have lived in and around Calgary, like, we're on water restrictions, we have water shortages, we've got all these problems that, infrastructure problems that we're trying to deal with. So there has to be, some sort of, sustainable immigration system put in place and controls on immigration. And then otherwise, I mean, Alberta has a bloated bureaucracy as well. So we're going to have a new constitution, right? We're going to have a bicameral legislature. We're going to have a legislature based on population. And then we're going to have a Senate based on provincial regions. So the cities can't completely screw over, farm folk and tell us how we need to live our lives, because that's not going to fly very far, right?
It sounds like the American system a little bit.
Yeah, but in the microcosm of Alberta, right? And then we'll have an elected executive, either a president or a prime minister, depending on whether Albertans want to retain their relationship with the monarchy. I have no strong feelings either way. Do we have a governor general, or is the president of Alberta or the prime minister of Alberta both the head of state or chief executive, right? And then we want to incorporate some elements of the Swiss system into Alberta, because Albertans and those of us that are involved in our movement are sick and tired of electing politicians that we think are good people, only to find when they get into office, they turn into these autocrats that basically think that they're the boss of us and that they're governing us rather than the other way around. Right. Yeah. So, we want to avoid that. So we're thinking, we're going to be putting in provisions for recall of every legislator and executive, on 50,000 signatures. So the bar is going to be really low to make these buggers behave themselves. Right. Yeah. And, if they
penalties for, any kind of bad behavior, politician breaks the law, they don't get away with it.
Well, it's not even breaking the law. You're elected by your constituents. So you better be really close to your constituents and find out what they want, and don't vote in favor of stupid shit that drives your constituents crazy. Like telling them how many friends they can have, or locking them in their houses, or trying to take away their firearms, right? Like messing with their property, letting, farm inspectors come onto their property without a warrant, just basic things like that. One of the things about Albertans is, we don't want a lot of life, right? We want to be able to work hard. We want to raise money for our families and take care of our moms and dads and our kids, right? We want to be able to earn a good living. We don't want to be excessively taxed to the point where we're completely disincentivized from working, right? Yep. And we expect government to stay the living hell out of our lives. Right? By and large, talk to people in our movement. Nobody cares who sleeps with who. Nobody cares what anybody's sexual preferences are or any of that foolishness, right? I don't talk about my sex life. You don't talk about your sex life. That's how we like it, right?
Sure.
I don't need to wear a badge proclaiming my sexuality, right? It's just all of that ludicrous shit is going to be over, right? And and it makes sense. And by and large, I mean, there is, until Trudeau came along and all this divisive, politics, a division, identity politics garbage started, everybody in this country got along. Nobody cared about who married whom. All of us, basically had the same goal for our government. We wanted them to keep the debt and deficit low so that servicing the debt and interest on our debt didn't gobble up half of the federal budget, so that, or the provincial budget, such that, we had to be taxed at an excessively high rate. So, we want low debt, we want low deficit, we want government that minds its own business and stays out of our lives, and we just want to be left alone to get along with one another. That's all we want.
So
right?
you've outlined what you feel a great Alberta, an effective Alberta government would be in an independent sovereign nation. But let's back up a little bit. Getting there first, right? So let's just say that there is a referendum this year and it's separate. It's not part of all of these other questions that Smith wants to include on this ballot. So let's say we do it at the end of November, and let's just say, hey, man, it passes. Wow, cool. 55% of Albertans want to separate and be a sovereign nation. Then negotiations begin with the government of Canada. Who do you feel would be doing those negotiations on behalf of Alberta? Would it be the Danielle Smith government, representatives from her government, or would there have to be?
I guess that's a big TBD, we'll see where we end up.
When I ask that, the reason I ask that is because, Danielle Smith technically has been elected to be the premier of Alberta within Canada, right? So
no, that's why I say that's a big to be determined, right? I mean, I think, that's one of the issues that we're all wrestling with. I mean, do we trust Danielle to negotiate, on behalf of Alberta, given that she can't seem to decide whether she's on Team Alberta or Team Canada? That's a very good question. That being said, though, in all likelihood, if there's a successful referendum in Alberta, U.S. recognition of Alberta sovereignty is going to quickly follow, right? And and we're going to have a constitutional convention. But I hear you, Shadow, because I mean that's why we're sort of getting the pushback, and we've got all this sort of strategic maneuvering by members of the present government and elsewhere, right? They don't want the Westminster system of government to end. All of the political parties are currently organized around that. They like when they get a majority government that they, like Danielle, she can go from being a libertarian princess to the Dark Queen of Alberta and have, complete dictatorial power to do whatever the hell she wants to do when she wants to do it, right?
Yeah,
I mean, they love that power. It's like, hook me up, like they're addicted to it. We're having to deal with, and I have to tell you, they don't like our movement, right? Because our movement largely came out of the Freedom Convoy, which we're proud of, right? And we're people that are pissed off with any and all over government regulation and government sticking their noses in their lives and ruining our lives. So we don't want bureaucrats telling us what to do. We want the people to be able to tell bureaucrats what to do. We want legislation that changes the administrative law rules and forces the courts to look at anything a bureaucrat says with the appropriate level of skepticism, as opposed to taking judicial notice that a bureaucrat said that this is true, therefore they are an expert, therefore I must listen to the bureaucrat. Sorry, citizen, get out of my courtroom. Two cases from the Supreme Court, which are called Vavilov and Dore, right, which I believe need to be legislated out of existence in a free and democratic society, because it basically means that if a citizen has a beef with a bureaucrat, good luck winning. I mean, I practiced admin law my entire career, right? So, those cases need to be legislated out of existence, and there needs to be balance restored between the citizen and the bureaucrat. Now, they're not public servants anymore. They're public masters. Like, I'll tell you a funny story, and it's because all that World Economic Forum 15-minute city crap that drives us all crazy, right? So I went into town the other morning to give another presentation to a group of very high-powered, Calgary business people. I was probably talking to about $4 billion in that room, billion with a B, okay?
Whoa,
fund managers, we're talking some very high-powered people, right? So, give my presentation. I'm driving back to the ranch, and there's only one traffic light on Highway 22 between once I'm on the highway between downtown and the ranch. And of course, it's all festooned with all these giant cameras, like license plate readers, right? And I look up and I see the police have a car pulled over. So, okay, 70 kilometer an hour zone. Well, I look down, I'm going 70 because it could be, just a fishing hole. But then I'm driving along at 70 and all of a sudden this car zooms up behind me with its lights on. It goes, son of a bitch, he's pulling me over. So this young, really fresh-faced constable walks up to my car window, and I said, "What can I do for you this morning, constable?" He said, we've got a registration enforcement program going on. So basically, what they're doing is they're reading our license plates off of the off of the license plate readers to see instantaneously through the computer who's forgotten to register their vehicle. So, I've got a bunch of farm trucks and whatever, and I hadn't checked the registration on that truck in a while, so it was out of date. And I had, it was insured, and I had my license, whatever, so no big deal, right? And I thought, isn't that interesting? Because it's exactly what I thought about those damn lights. They're going to be able to monitor us going back and forth to town, and then soon some World Economic Forum bureaucrat paid by Carney is going to tell me how many times I can go to town for groceries, how many times I can go back and forth, how many kilometers I'm driving, all that kind of stuff, so that they can add a new level of misery to my life with all of their intrusive cameras and bullshit, right? Yeah. So this is now the modern Alberta that people like me are really upset about, right? But the funny part of the story, and this is like the happy ending to the story. So this young constable says, well, you seem like you're in a really good mood this morning. Like, I'm giving you a ticket. And I said, well, I just came from a really awesome meeting downtown, and I was talking to a bunch of my fellow Albertans about Alberta independence, and most of them are, that I was talking to are very supportive of what I'm doing. So, it was a very pleasant meeting, and I'm in a really good mood. And he goes, oh, he said, and now he's talking about all the police, right? And he goes, we've really been looking at that stuff. It's really exciting. And I said, yeah, I imagine it would be for you. Because I said, we've actually been running some model pay stubs, what your pay stub will look like after independence as opposed to, whatever, once we get rid of federal income tax, all this other. You're going to get like a $20,000 a year pay raise. He goes, I know. We're all excited about it.
Here's your tickets, sir.
yeah, right? And whatever. So it's really, really interesting. People are figuring it out. I mean, that message, as much as the mainstream media, is still trying to portray us as a bunch of, backwoods yokels that don't know our ass from a hole in the ground, and we're never going to do it because we're not organized enough. Well, now we've proven to them that we're relatively well educated. We're not backwoods yokels. We can organize. Right. Yeah. So now all the new attacks are starting. Right. So like I read, the politician that everybody in Alberta loves to hate. Like, I'll send you this BitChute thing later so you can see a speech that I gave on Monday, and I just mentioned Jason Kenney to 1,000 Calgarians, and everybody starts booing. Oh, Kenney, go home, leave Alberta, boo! Right? And people are still that angry at Jason Kenney, right? So Jason Kenney and Nancy Southern, popped their little heads up to give their latest little diatribe about defending Canada and keeping Alberta in Canada and blah 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 blah, right? And what everybody forgets is that ATCO is basically a company that runs on government patronage and government money. I mean, ATCO was actually convicted of a bunch of overbilling. I think that's the most polite way to put it. Overbilling of Alberta electrical service customers, and we're subject to a massive fine. I'm not going to say the amount because if I'm wrong, I don't want anybody to sue me over it, but it was a massive amount in the millions and millions of dollars. And of course, who was premier? Jason Kenney, right? Who didn't, insist that ATCO also repay all of the customers that they ripped off and give them all their money back, right? Who didn't insist that happened? Jason Kenney, who's now on the board of ATCO. Jason Kenney. So,
corruption,
that's Alberta Business 101, under the UCP from time to time, and why it is that so many of us want to see a change in the way in which we're governed and the accountability of these people that we elect to high office in this province. And that's why, and again, there's that real tension. So, and why we're getting so much, we're getting pushback from some MLAs as opposed to others, and the premier and members of her cabinet and otherwise, because they know fundamentally, they're not going to have the same jobs that they've had in the same manner that they currently have them. And if it's up to us, they're going to be very, very, very restricted in what they can do on a going forward basis under a new constitution, right? And they don't like it.
What I saw last week, Yves-Francois Blanchet of the Bloc Quebecois being interviewed by the left-wing corporate media. I think it was in Ottawa. And one reporter, CBC, says to him, so, we're hearing that Alberta is talking about separation. It's becoming a national story. Do you have any advice for them? Right? That was the question. And all of the reporters were laughing, and Duceppe himself, it's not Duceppe, what's Yves Blanchet.
Yeah, I know who you mean anyway. So I saw the clip.
then they're laughing and they're having a good time. Like, oh, look at those cute separatists over there in Quebec. Let's treat them well, pat them on the head. And meanwhile, they turn you guys into horrible demonic goblins for wanting the same thing that Quebec has been bellowing about since the 1950s.
Like, I mean, like I was 3 or 4 weeks ago and I never bothered replying to him because it was just nonsense. But, like we all know that Jason Kenney's waiting for Pierre Poilievre for the knives to come out and all the conservatives to start stabbing Poilievre in the back and there be a conservative leadership race, right? So Kenney, and all of his federalist nonsense, of course, he's positioning himself for Quebec and Ontario as the person to tamp down separatist feelings in Alberta, and that should make him the leader. And Poilievre's doing it too, incidentally, whatever. We'll get to that in a minute. But, this is the positioning that Kenney's trying to do. So, we're all going like 4 or 5 weeks ago, might be a bit longer now, but Kenney popped out of his little gopher hole like spring, right? And sends out this stupid tweet on X or whatever, or posting on X saying that Jeff Rath is a traitorous kook was the subject of his X posting, right? Yeah. And of course, I didn't bother replying because I didn't have to. It's like, because if you read the comments underneath his posting, they were like 99-1 against Kenney and in favor of me. Like, you fat bastard, we fired you for a reason. We trust Jeff Rath way more than we trust those shots that you forced into our arms. You loser, go home.
I think I may have been one of the people that was on the comment list.
Yeah, but again, so I didn't need to reply because and then the Western Standard did an article about it. And the comments on the Western Standard were very similar to the comments on the Twitter posting. So and that really should tell people where Albertans are at right now. Like, so we have. I'm basically a litigator. I'm a barrister. I'm not running for public office. I'm never going to run for public office, right? I'm just a guy trying to get a job done, which is specifically to get Alberta the hell out of Canada, right? So I've got more political popularity and I've got more political, support in Alberta than a former premier of Alberta. That should tell people something. If they think we don't have a hope in hell of succeeding, right?
So, the money, you mentioned that you were talking to a room, $4 billion. I'm not asking for any names here, but that is a significant backing that the project has.
There's all kinds. Now all the corporations are waking up. Once we get into the referendum period, I think under the legislation, I haven't checked it recently, but every corporation can donate 34 grand. Every individual can donate 34 grand. I can guarantee you on our side of the equation, on the Alberta independence equation, there's way more Albertans on our side that can afford to donate $34,000 each on behalf of their wife, their company, their kids, whatever, than the dye your hair purple and stick your face full of nose ring crowd does on the NDP side, right?
Well, they're all on social assistance, but what I'm asking here is you're going to have significant financial backing for this movement. Let's just say that the numbers right now, and I don't know what they are because there hasn't been a poll that I've seen. Let's just say it's 35% of Albertans who can vote will vote for separation. You're going to have to push that to 55 or 60% just to make a point, right? It could be 51, I suppose, but you let's say 55 just to make it clear that the people.
Sure, and just I want to address the polling issue, right? I laughed the other day. The CBC was talking to the same political scientists that they've been. Joe Smith, political scientist, says that support for independence in Alberta is 20%, and it hasn't increased significantly in the last number of months. And he sees no momentum. Right? This is what he's saying. Right? Of course, I'm on the ground. I'm seeing something totally different. Right? Yeah. And then Rachel Parker had Main Street do a poll actually shortly after that infamous tweet of hers went out that got 25 million impressions with me in it, suggesting that there's nothing wrong with a group of Albertans going down to the States to investigate the possibility of U.S. statehood, right? After that, her poll came out, it was at 37%. And then Don Braid wrote an article not too long ago that had support for independence in Alberta. Oh, well, this will never succeed. Only 40% of conservative voters are in favor of independence, and 4% of NDP voters are in favor of independence. Well, dude, I can do the math. That's 44% of likely voters are in favor of independence, and that was 3 weeks ago, right? And that's without again, that conversation that I had with that really, really nice young constable the other day, where, you know, policemen, firemen, nurses, working Albertans, right, are going, wait a minute, like I make 80 or 90 grand a year. I pay 25,000 a year in federal taxes and UI and CPP. And my wife's a nurse and she pays, whatever. So that means that we could have savings in our family of like $40,000 a year, right? So that's real money. I mean, you can help to take care of your parents. If your kids want to go to a tennis camp in Arizona or whatever the hell you want to do, that's money that's staying in your pocket rather than going to a bunch of Trudeau bureaucrats who want to bleat on about the climate emergency and how heteronormativity causes climate change.
So let me get to the question that I was building to there with the polling numbers, right? So if we can get that to 55%, it's going to take a marketing campaign, I believe.
No. And we're all.
Wait. Considering the fact that the federal government is going to come at you with their own multi-million-dollar marketing campaign. There's going to be billboards. It's going to be social media. It's going to last for months. Television, everywhere, right? So you're going to have to counter it with something else, and you're going to need the best marketers to do that. But you actually just said something that could be used in a marketing campaign. You need like a 30-second elevator pitch or a great slogan, right? Hey, you want to save $10,000? Hey, you want to save $20,000? Alberta independence, whatever, right? Like,
we're actually on the process right now, planning a bunch of push polling. I don't want to get into the details of it, but that's going to be, the new form of the independence question is going to be if, it could be shown to you that that your family income would increase by at least $30,000 a year, right? Would you vote for independence, yes or no? Right? And then poll that question to 2 million Albertans at $1.06 on a 1.6 cents a robocall. The other thing is too, there's a lot of anonymous money, and it's got to be corporate money doing this stuff. This clip is like 3 minutes long, so I won't play the whole thing. But I mean, some group, we don't know who they are. They're not us. Did this amazing video that's better than anything Alberta tourism ever did. That is going wild all over the internet. I'll just play you a little bit of it. I'm gonna see if I can skip towards the end. Hang on. I'm gonna skip ahead to the best part, which is telling Ottawa to go screw itself. Hang on a sec. Here we go. So listen to this. Okay, listen to this. I'll hold it up to my microphone.
But for too long, Alberta has been a titan taken for granted. Our wealth siphoned to serve distant agendas. Our energy
and really nice. Where's the camera? Like really nice graphics and really nice video, right?
Is that on YouTube?
Yeah. No, it's on X, right? Here, you gotta hear the tail end of this. It's worth
those that dismiss our sacrifice. Canada has reaped the rewards of Alberta's toil, our oil, our labor, our spirit, while offering crumbs in return. We've been used, not valued, exploited, not embraced, but no more. Alberta will not be a servant in its own house. They told us to kneel, to conform, to surrender our way of life. But Alberta does not bend. We are the engine of industry, the heartbeat.
Wow.
Yeah, it goes on. But anyway, you get the point. So we had nothing to do with that. Right? So there's corporate money floating around, and that's not the only video like that. All of these videos are now being produced and paid for. I have sort of a hobby business I'm involved in. I'm involved in a music production company. So I know what it costs to produce music videos. That's a $20,000 video minimum. Yeah. And it's slick. I mean, it's really slick. And on top of it, they're paying to boost it on Facebook and, X, whatever. So there's a real push and a campaign behind it, right?
Wow.
So, and we have nothing to do with it. So I think there's going to be a lot more of that. I mean, because the other thing is too, I think there's a lot of companies and industries that don't necessarily want to stick their necks out, but they've got, they've got corporate money. They've got the ability to do stuff like that. There's lots of people in the States too that are interested in doing stuff like that. I mean, as an example, one of the crazy things that Trudeau did, without telling anybody, like you heard of the West Coast tanker ban. Well, nobody probably knows this one, and across your viewership, Trudeau one day likely on Mark Carney's advice, quietly changed the regulations for rail tank cars. right? So that 90% of the North American rolling stock could no longer be used to ship Alberta oil to Texas, okay? Guess what company is the only company in North America that owns rail cars capable of transporting Alberta crude to Texas? Berkshire Hathaway. So guess what company owns the only company in North America that manufactures rail cars that meet the new Liberal specifications?
Brookfield.
Berkshire Hathaway. But again, like but again, we all know how tight Warren Buffett was with Trudeau. We know there's obviously, we need to dig into it, but I'm sure there's a relationship between Brookfield and Berkshire Hathaway, right? There has to be, and it's just like, Berkshire Hathaway owns Carrier, right? Like Crane, the plumbing company that, that actually manufactures the most heat pumps in the world. Why did you think Trudeau was pushing heat pumps? Brookfield, Mark Carney. Right? Like, it's just despicable, right? I mean, in Alberta, free Alberta, all of the North American rolling stock will be available again, and we can go back to shipping as much oil as we need to by train down to Texas. And needless to say, there's a lot of people on the receiving end of that oil in Texas that have a vested interest in helping us get where we need to go. So a lot of them are very busy, helping us out, behind the scenes without us directing them to do anything, because it's in their best economic interest, right?
This happens. So let's just say the referendum happens in November and you get a win. And after that, right, now it's time to negotiate with the federal government, I suppose. What would you be negotiating? I heard you say a while back, and you got a great deal of ridicule for this as well, I think it was on X, that you'll be able to keep your Canadian passports to the people who still want to remain Canadian within Alberta. Is that true?
Yeah, of course it's true. Canada doesn't recognize the renunciation of citizenship, right? Mike Myers still has a Canadian passport. Mike Myers has 3 citizenships: UK, US, and Canada. So Mr. Elbows Up, right? Pick a country, Mike, but stop being Canadian, because you're not. Same with Carney. He had UK, Ireland, EU, Canada. They now say that somebody on Twitter, Mark Carney's renounced all of his passports. To which my clever reply was, that's interesting. He renounced all of his passports. Did he renounce all of his offshore tax havens? And did he renounce all of his offshore accounts?
Yeah.
I doubt it.
He's going to have to, within the next few days, he's going to have to reveal all of his holdings, right?
I don't think he's going to. I think he's going to try to pull the Trump and keep his tax. He's going to try to keep that all away from us, right? I don't think they can make him do it. We'll see. But he's just going to say it's all in a blind trust. It's all in a blind trust. Nothing to see here. It's blind. I can't see it. You can't see it. Nobody can see it.
Yeah.
Because obviously, he's probably got more offshore trusts than a moose has ticks. It's just money just buried everywhere, right?
So we're talking about a grassroots movement here. There was a massive rally in Edmonton, I think a week and a half ago at the legislature there. Is there anything like that happening? Just random?
There's lots of random stuff popping up. Like last night during an Oilers game, no less, Ezra Levant decided to, and he's doing it for his own reasons. Like, he's got people signing up for stuff, thinking they're signing a referendum petition, but really they're giving Ezra Levant all of their contact information for his own business purposes, right? So Ezra Levant did an event the other night, that drew 1,000 people in Calgary. We had an event on Monday that drew 1,000 people in Calgary. We're planning big events in Edmonton. I mean, hell, we got one planned. I was just talking about it today. We're going to have a massive event in Provost, Alberta, closer to the Saskatchewan border, in June, where we're expecting 4,000 or 5,000 people. The Roadhammers are going to play. It's going to be a lot of fun, right? Oh, we're going to turn this into a big summer party, man. Like, we're going to be rocking and rolling and, drawing out the crowds and getting out the kids and having barbecues and, and just having a great time in and around sticking it to Mark Carney. Like, it's going to be fun. He's going to be the last Prime Minister of Canada, if I have anything to say about it.
That's what many people have been saying. And I think Preston Manning even said it. I'm not sure where he said it, but he said, I think Mark Carney is going to be the last Prime Minister of Canada. Well, what happens after Alberta? Alberta leaves, Saskatchewan follows. That would be my assumption, obviously.
No, and then Quebec. Why would Quebec stay if they no longer have Alberta to suck dry, right?
Yeah.
So, Quebec will leave. And, and then British Columbia, what is it going to do? Like, just continue moving trains back and forth to Ontario? Like, so I mean, British Columbia is probably going to have to look at its options as well, right?
Yeah.
So, so I guess Mark Carney will be the Prime Minister of Ontario and the Maritimes. And, if they'll ever reelect him after he completely shredded the entire country, with his Marxist bullshit, I mean, because let's not forget, he was the one advising Justin Trudeau. I mean, Justin Trudeau was a drama school dropout, right? And, I'd met him on several occasions. Certainly not never was the sharpest knife in the drawer. Had no business being prime minister, other than the fact that he had that family name. And a bunch of Jean Chrétien supporters saw him speak at his dad's funeral and went, we have an answer to Paul Martin.
That was it.
Yeah, and all the Martinites within the Liberal Party, right? We have, whatever, right? So, it's a real sad state, and that's the other reason that Alberta wants to get the hell out. We need to get away from the federal Liberals. I mean, they're evil. I mean, these people, what they've done to this country, and I mean, it's all just to line their own pockets. Like, they're not doing anything for the benefit of Canada. They're all working, working angles everywhere.
The Laurentian elites, right? The ones who control the Liberal Party and to some extent the Conservative Party. But you got to worry too, and you got to keep your eye on things as well. Not you necessarily, just in general, because there's elites in Alberta as well. There's elites in BC.
Well, no, I just gave you that Alberta Politics 101 lesson with the incestuous relationship between Jason Kenney and Nancy Southern, right?
Right.
I mean, that's, but again, like, you got to hear this from me, okay? Like, we've always known as Albertans that there's always been a vague whiff of stench of corruption floating around the Conservative Party of Alberta. It's kind of like when you walk by the side of a septic tank on the wrong day in the wrong wind or whatever. Yeah, there's just something that just smells a little bit.
There,
yeah, you can smell it, right? But we've largely tolerated as Albertans that little stench of sewage that emanates from the Conservative Party of Alberta. Because by and large, they provided good governance and relatively low tax rates, and and kept their goddamn noses out of our individual lives, right? But then Kenney completely shredded that compact during COVID, right? When he thought, in order, and again, in my personal view, to pander to Eastern Canada, because he knew that he was never going to be elected Prime Minister of Canada if he did what he should have done, which would have been the easiest thing to do, which was just to follow every single announcement and policy that was put in by Ron DeSantis in Florida. Like, had he done that, he would have come out of COVID in Alberta as a hero, right? There would have been a lot of left-wing Karens that were really upset that they couldn't impose, communist rule on Alberta for, a month or two. They would have been upset, but they wouldn't have been by far the majority. Kenney would have been a hero, right? And would have easily, sailed through his term, and he would have been reelected probably with, you have 87 constituencies, like with, an 82 constituency majority, right? Had he just done that, it was so simple for him to do. But of course, the Trump derangement syndrome is so high in Quebec and Ontario, that's how Carney got elected, that there is no way that Kenney could follow sensible Republican policies, conservative policies of Governor DeSantis in Florida, because he was afraid it was going to alienate, all of the Karens in Ontario and Quebec that he was going to need to get elected Prime Minister. And again, that's the lesson, and that's the problem with Canadian federalism, is that it entices politicians like Jason Kenney, right, to make really, really bad decisions contrary to the interests of their own citizens, because they've got their eye on that golden ring of becoming Prime Minister of Canada and being the boss of everyone, right? So that's what we want to get away from, right?
Imagine Alberta as its own country. That's 5 million people, right? Or close to.
Yeah.
I think probably a few million more over the course of 3 years, depending on the immigration system that you guys.
Well, there's lots of people in Ontario who are selling their homes and their businesses and moving to Alberta right now.
Yeah, absolutely.
And we're happy to have them. Hardworking, industrious people. You got your own money. You can afford to buy a house. You're not going to be on welfare. Hey, come on down.
You
right?
might lose some of the lefties out of the cities, which would be all right. But that adds Saskatchewan to it, right? So there's another 1.5 million people, and you're looking at a population down the road, and not that far down the road, of probably close to 10 million people. That's not bad. And that's a lot of great land. And you've got everything.
Of course.
You know, I mean, it's
no,
all there.
but on top of it, right? Like already, like Alberta, and it's shocking when you think about it. So Alberta's population is roughly the same as the Republic of Ireland. Okay, we're roughly 5, they're 5.5, whatever, right? Our GDP is, and I was shocked when I saw this. It really bothered me. Our GDP in Alberta is currently $350 billion, right? Ireland is number 2 in the world after Luxembourg. Their GDP is currently $550 billion.
Ireland?
Ireland, right? But, and I'll get into the why of it in a minute. Alberta's could be double Ireland's. Our GDP could be $1 trillion. Then why isn't it? It's because Mark Lalonde and the Trudeau Liberals back in the 80s were terrified about Alberta becoming the economic center of Canada and have done everything that they can to kick the crap out of us ever since, because they would lose their, the wrench and power base with all of the, companies and headquarters and everybody else moving to Alberta, which is now going to happen. Right. I mean, that dream of theirs, that they tried to prevent, or that nightmare of theirs that they tried to prevent, is going to come true. And, and Alberta's the lowest taxed, lowest regulated jurisdiction, in North America. Why wouldn't corporate headquarters and investment flock to Alberta? Like, and again, getting back to Jason Kenney and his incestuous relationship with Nancy Southern, the two of them popped up the other day and said, oh, well, we had clients coming from Japan and Korea, and they were afraid to invest because they didn't know how they were going to get their goods out of Alberta. And of course, okay, so Nancy, your salary gets published from time to time in the top, in the top tier of Canadian paid CEOs. You've got all your family trust money squirreled away all over the world that your dad left you. You're worth $1.5 billion, $2, $3, $5 billion, whatever. You should be able to communicate with clients. Same with Jason Kenney. One would think he's a professional communicator. So what was the difficulty in either one of them telling people from Japan or Korea, oh God, don't worry about that. The trains are never going to stop running through Alberta to Vancouver. They can't. Your goods are going to move just fine, right? And on top of it, you guys are business people. They said, oh, well, we don't know what the rules are going to be. Well, the rules are going to be a lot less than they are now. So you're business people. So you tell me when you make the most money. Do you make the most money in a very high taxed, high regulated jurisdiction, or do you make the most money in a low taxed, low regulated jurisdiction? Alberta is about to become a low taxed, low regulated jurisdiction. You need to get in on the front edge of the wave and capitalize on this, because you're going to become very, very, very wealthy beyond any projections that you currently have in any of your prospectuses and business plans. Come on board. I mean, these people are supposed to be professional communicators, and and they're supposed to have a clue as to how economics work. Right? How hard would that be to tell anybody, or to have that translated into Japanese and Korean? And I don't think for a second that any Japanese business people from Japan or Korea are really that stupid. I think that's just a story that Jason Kenney and Nancy Southern made up, as part of their ongoing campaign to stay on the gravy train that they're on and continue to suck up all the subsidies and patronage and and everything else that they can get their little paws on, so
Donald Trump signed, he was just over in the UAE, just signed I think $1.4 trillion worth of deals with all the big money over there, and nothing is happening in Canada. We get Carney and we get Stephen Guilbeault saying, well, there's no company that wants to build a pipeline in Canada anyway. I mean, we're not a serious country. Canada.
No, and Carney's not a serious human being. Like, even his statement, oh, we might allow one pipeline if I can develop a national consensus. So, and I was actually talking with a group that I was talking to recently, I said to them, it reminds me of Mackenzie King's comment on conscription. A pipeline if necessary, but not necessarily a pipeline. Right? Like, how stupid does he think we are? Like, does he not understand that we're well-educated people that have a view of Canadian history, and we understand how ridiculous he sounds?
No, because of the arrogance, right? It's that Laurentian elite arrogance and that condescension, and they look at us all like crickets, like insects. to be crushed and used for protein powder.
Yeah, soylent green, absolutely.
All right, man. Look, we got to wrap it up. Is there anything left, or are you going to come back on in a couple of weeks?
No, I'll come back on whenever the hell you want me. I always enjoy talking to you. We always have a really lively conversation. I do, again, though, want to close and by reminding everybody of the actual economic message that we're selling, right? There is nothing, and keep in mind, I mean, Manitobans, Saskatchewanians, British Columbians, keep in mind, there is nothing, there is no deal that your premier and Mark Carney could negotiate that will have greater value to you and your economy than a complete end of all federal regulation and all federal taxation of your province. I mean, think about how much wealthier everybody's going to be when we just declare this failed experiment of Canada over, and that everybody, can get on with, living lives as free, sovereign individuals in low tax, low regulatory regimes that respect our rights and interests as human beings and don't treat us like, we're the problem, and that somehow every time we turn on our car to go to work, that we're an existential threat to the planet by making plant food, to make plants grow better, out of the tailpipes of our cars and whatever else. Everybody just needs to get their head around it. And I really do believe that Carney is going to be the last prime minister of Canada. And I mean, even Ontario should ask itself, right? What the hell do we need the federal government for anyway? They've outlived their usefulness. We can all have our own militias. We can all have our own National Guards, whatever. I mean, everybody would be so much better off just by getting rid of that entire wasteful level of government and only having one level of government that is much closer to the people, that will have to be much more responsive to the rights and interests of their people, as opposed to this grossly bloated federal bureaucracy that's just trying to kill us all.
All right, brother. Thank you for coming on tonight. And again, you know what? If you got some news for us, you're more than welcome back anytime.
Oh, I'm always happy to come on and talk nonsense with you, Shadow. You know that.
All right, Jeff. Have a great night, man. Thank you.
Okay, you too. I'll talk to you later. Goodbye.
Okay, there is Jeff Rath, the Alberta Prosperity Project. And here's Mark Carney and Stephen Guilbeault.
I appreciate that you've read my book very carefully. At the core of the way I talk about the energy transition is the future of, including about Canada being an energy superpower, is the future is low risk. Canada's low risk is a business investment place. Low cost. We're getting costs down, including the oil sands. The marginal production is low cost, and low carbon. All three of those come together. We have the ingredients of all that. Let's get together and move on it. And it takes more than just one pipeline.
And the Canadian Energy Regulator, as well as the International Energy Agency, are telling us that probably by 2028, 2029, demand for oil will peak globally, and it will also peak in Canada. So as far as I know, there are no investors right now, there are no companies that are saying that they want to build an east-west pipeline. And as you know, these things are built by companies, not governments.
Here's something else. Here's a CBC story. I think this one was yesterday, maybe today. No, 2 days ago. Violent sex offender expected to live in Winnipeg, a high risk to reoffend. His name is Michael Curtis Thomas, 31 years old, convicted in September of 2020. So he's only been in jail for less than 5 years. Aggravated sexual assault against a woman. So he's out. He's going to live in Winnipeg. And then look at this. Just 2 days later, another one. Sex offender with long criminal record expected to live in Winnipeg after release, according to the police. His name, Charles Henry Desjardins, 62, was serving a 10-year sentence for sexual assault conviction, and there he is. We can't let these people out back into our societies so they can do it all over again. The United States is cracking down on all of this stuff right now. They're shutting their borders down. Their southern border is the most secure it's ever been. They're getting rid of illegal aliens who have been coming into the country and committing crimes at a record pace. Not the crime committing, getting rid of the people who are committing the crimes. Billions of dollars are being brought into the U.S. economy. Look at this. Trump's visit to the UAE. Watch.
Of President Donald Trump's exceptional efforts to strengthen the long-standing ties of friendship and strategic partnership between the United Arab Emirates and United States of America, I am honored to announce that His Highness Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed Al Nahyan bestows the Order of Zayed upon President Trump.
Will you give me the honor?
Hang on a minute. 1.4, why is this not there? $1.4 trillion worth of deals signed in the United Arab Emirates that will be flowing into the U.S. economy. The man knows how to do business, and he knows how to take care of his own people, regardless of what the left-wing freaks down there think. Is he in on some of these deals? Is he making money personally? Maybe. I don't know. But does it really matter at this stage of the game if you are getting a part of it? If you're an American and you're starting to see things clearly again, because now you can afford stuff again, and if you work hard, you can do things again. And then here in Canada, oh, no, we can't have another pipeline. Why don't we use the one we have? It's only at 40% capacity. That's a lie. Well, maybe we can get a pipeline going, one pipeline. It won't make us an energy superpower, and we're going to need national consensus. Well, you're never going to get it. And that's exactly what he's going to say. We can't get Quebec to agree. What do you want me to do? Well, why don't you promise to use the emergency powers? Oh, wait a minute, Mark Carney, you did promise to use the emergency powers so you can take on the Americans. Good luck with that. How many of you, write it down in the comments. I don't think I've even asked this question directly to you guys yet. And we're an hour and a half into the show. So we're going to be moving to the extension pretty quick. Oh, and by the way, guys, there's this guy called Matthew Brown. He's a DOD whistleblower. Got some very, very, very important things to say. We're going to run part 1 of that interview tonight on the extension. Whoa. Heavy duty. We live in a matrix. That's what he said. Write down in the comments. I'm seriously wanting to read this. I don't need you guys to editorialize or anything like that. If you want to explain why you feel the way you do, of course. Let's try and keep it clean. Let's try and keep it civil. We had a little bit more dirty language, not dirty, bad language on the show tonight than we normally do, but whatever. Sometimes you just got to let it out. Do you believe that Canada is over? Do you believe that Alberta should, in fact, separate from Canada? Or do you want it to stay together? Whatever answer you have is fine. I don't want anybody thinking that because they say, no, I want Canada to stay together, that you're going to be, scolded for that. It's not going to happen. You're allowed to have your opinion. It's important, right? And I want to get kind of an accurate gauge on it here. And this is not limited to the people from Alberta either. This is wherever you're watching from. If you have a stake in Canada of any kind, because I know we have American viewers and we've got viewers in Europe and Australia as well. Obviously, you're watching this particular show for a reason. You've got some kind of a tie to this country and you're interested in what happens in Canada. So everybody's allowed to go ahead and offer their opinions up. Do you think it's time for Canada to say, well, we tried, and then just move along, separate up, or should it stay together? Because every time we've got a liberal government in there, this seems to happen, doesn't it? Okay, you guys. Thank you very much. Again, there is no show tomorrow night. We're going to be getting rid of the Friday shows through the summer, and we'll bring them back in the fall. I'm taking 3-day weekends from now until September. That's just the way it is, folks. I need a little bit of time to breathe. I am considering strongly, and I know Maggie Hope Braun is as well, taking a trip out to BC to Universal Ostrich Farm. But that is like, if I do that, it's going to be a last minute decision and I'll just go. And the next time you hear from me, I'll be on the road on the Trans-Canada, somewhere between Manitoba and BC. The extension is coming up in just a second. Oh, by the way, I want to announce the winner of either the Shadow at Night mug here or the baseball cap. This is for the all access folks at shadowdavis.com. They're the only ones eligible to win these prizes. And we give one of these things away every Thursday night. And tonight, our winner is Trudy Phillips of British Columbia. Trudy, congratulations. I'll be giving you a call in the next few minutes and asking which of these you want, the hat or the mug. Thank you very much, you guys. I love you all. I appreciate you all. And I will talk to most of you on Monday night at 8 o'clock Central Time. In the meantime, the extension, and this is going to be a good one tonight, begins in a couple of minutes for the All Access Nighthawks on shadowdavis.com. I'll see you there in a couple of minutes. Good night, everybody.